Hello and welcome to Lightways Astrology with me, Anna Isabel. I am a psychological astrologer primarily. And today I am just so excited because I've been waiting a long time to be able to speak to this wonderful astrologer. It is Clare Martin. Clare, welcome to Lightways.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So the reason I've been anticipating talking to you with such excitement is because I read your book, Alchemy, the Soul of Astrology, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was one of the most beautiful and insightful explanations for a good deal of what lies behind astrology. And you kind of brought out the magic in it for me, which I really loved. So, start off with, it would be good if you could tell us a little bit about alchemy.
Right. Yes. So alchemy in an astrological context, for sure. As I said in my book, the first time I came across this connection between the two subjects was in a wonderful, very inspiring lecture given by Liz Green at Regent's College way back in the 80s. And I've met subsequently a few people who were at that seminar, and we were all blown away. But in my particular case, it just planted a seed, and it was there for a long, long time because at that time I was doing my master's in psychotherapy and counselling, and I chose to look at the relationship between alchemy and astrology in my dissertation. So in order to do that, I of course had to read all Jung's books on his three dedicated books on alchemy, and his pioneering work. Really, I suppose alchemy is about magic. It is about transformation, which is a very overused word. Um, but it meant for me that a birth chart was actually a potential experiment in a flask, if you like, in an alchemical flask, and that although the birth chart is exactly the same when we die as when we were born, nevertheless, it is possible through interacting um, with the birth chart to gain a huge amount of consciousness of wholeness, because the birth chart includes all kinds of shadow material and split energies and so on, and that actually the birth chart is really like an experiment in change and real change, not what I was particularly interested in is it's not intellectual. Alchemy isn't intellectual. It's very, in that sense, it's not spiritual insofar as so much of astrology is very vertical and spiritual in a way. But I felt that alchemy could bring the soul, the feminine, a feminine approach to working astrologically. And so that's how I've defined alchemy, really, is that because I've connected it to soul energies, it is actually a way of staying embodied, becoming even more embodied, more incarnated, and in the process bringing change. So I was very excited by that idea.
So was I when I was reading your book, evidently, because I couldn't wait to contact you. So this is, I think, why you think of it as being the soul of astrology. One of the things I appreciated about the book was the way that you explained actually the processes of alchemy, and perhaps it might be um, of interest if you could, in some way, succinctly describe what the aim of the alchemist was and how they would go about achieving it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think to sort of try to put it in a nutshell, I think really we're talking about the four great processes of change, which are basically elemental. So, and we all know in our lives that we experience these four processes. So, you know, from the coagulatio, if you like, from the earth, from the Saturn, the times of dryness and isolation. These are common experiences, and alchemy tells us what to do with them. It tells us to sit with it, to you know, to have the courage to face kind of bleakness and aloneness, and that it is actually part of a process of change if you can do that. Um, and so I felt it was very helpful for people going through a Saturn transit to think of it in terms of the coagulatio, when we become very fearful and very stuck, that actually it kind of validates that experience and gives purpose and meaning to it. And then, of course, there's the air process, which again these are common human experiences when suddenly the patterns change, where we feel that we're not caught anymore by our history, where possibilities come in, you know, um, and that's where we can see the bigger picture. We can see the symbolism of things. It's highly, in a sense, intellectual, but we escape from the confines of our lives, and that is brought with the transits of Uranus, and and it can completely change the way we think about things, the way um, we can break free. And each one of these processes has its dangers as well, because then we can escape completely into our heads and develop kind of philosophies which are very ungrounded. So that would be the shadow side of the Uranus process, of the air process, really, dissociation. Um, and then, of course, we have all experienced at various times the Pluto process, the burning, when we are on fire, which the alchemists were very familiar with, you know, because unless you have a sufficient amount of heat, which is brought by Pluto transits, we can't transform. But we have to hold it. We have to retain it. We have to internalize it if we possibly can. And the process of that brings massive change. Um, and then finally the water process, when we're all under Neptune, and you know, things get incredibly unclear, and we can feel lost and alone again, or we can be deluded. So, so literally just putting the four elements, the four major processes of alchemy, and defining them in terms of the four elements and in terms of these four great planets and their transits around our chart, you know, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, we can actually then start to live, in a sense, in a magical way, with a view to all of these processes being necessary and bringing about a metamorphosis in our lives. It's not easy. I think that was something I questioned a lot. You know, can people take this? Because each one of these processes is painful in its own way. But the alchemists would stay in the laboratory. They would, you know, lock the doors, lock the windows, and actually honor the process, whatever the process was. Try to, and that's what I felt, that astrologers, maybe it was another approach, you know, to say, yes, this is a value. Yes, stick with it. Yes, it has purpose and meaning. Yeah.
Well, you know, they stayed in their labs and locked the doors. We're stuck in our bodies. So incarnation is the equivalent of locking the soul in the lab and getting on with it. And heaven knows, in the last few weeks, I've been doing quite a lot of thinking about evolutionary astrology,
Mm-hmm.
due to the wonderful interview I did with Patricia Walsh, and also the past life regressions that I've been doing and interviewing another past life regressionist. So I've been thinking a lot about the soul and what it has to endure in the process of incarnation.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when I have a client in front of me who's recounting his or her experiences in previous lifetimes, it's pretty horrific what a soul can endure lifetime after lifetime until finally somehow they break free.
Mm.
And so when you were talking about the processes and the being locked in the lab, I thought, yeah, that's it. We're locked in the lab. Better or for worse, that's exactly what's happening. And I think that brings me to something that I've found quite inspiring, and it really got my mind thinking, because I was already thinking along those lines. So to read it in your book was really very exciting. And it was the issue of polarity,
Mm.
because I've been thinking about oppositions in the chart, and I've been thinking about how can we transcend them so that it's not an opposition anymore, that it's a transfer of energy from one planet to another in a collaborative way. How can we do that? And, I can easily imagine that happening with an opposition. Is it possible with a square? So my mind has been playing with these ideas, and then along comes your book. And so I think I'm just going to let you talk about polarity now.
Yes, well, isn't that the nugget which Jung gave to us? And I still find it. I always find it astonishing, really. I mean, in the world, if you like, out there, how ignorant we are as a culture, as a species, even, in our psychological development, about the fact that everything has its opposite. And we're still blaming others, judging others, and without any sense of having our own shadow side, our own opposites, because the opposite is always the direct opposite of where we are consciously standing. And so this is where astrology is so very, very useful, because we have to start thinking of, Taurus, Scorpio, Cancer, Capricorn, Libra, Aries, that as really as a way of encompassing both. We, in a sense, it's and or. It's and rather than or. It's being able to see or try to understand that whenever we have an opinion or whenever we're charged to judge, it says something much more about ourselves than about anybody else or anything else. And it doesn't seem to be even terribly well understood at all. You just read anything or watch anything, and it's all about polarities. And funnily enough, my latest book, which is now currently with the Wessex Astrologer, is exactly on this subject, and on relationships, which are usually formed by a set of polarities and projections. It's the projection that we do unknowingly, unconsciously, all the time, when actually we could be using that material to incorporate it into our awareness and to actually get bigger. And this is one thing that Jung said, that if we see a paradox or an opposition, then we have to make both bigger and suffer the opposites, which is what he said, and wait for a reconciling symbol, which basically includes both and transcends the opposites. And if anything is important in psychology today, I think it's that. And certainly we have the model in our birth charts, in the horoscope, which is a whole series of oppositions, whether it's the ascendant versus the descendant, or the midheaven versus the IC, or the nodal axis, polarized. We have such a brilliant alchemical experiment there. Just looking at a horoscope these are connected.
Indeed. In fact, I was just thinking about how you can have a chart that's very lopsided, where the planets are very much on one side and not on the other. And we look obviously at where the weight is, but perhaps we ought to be looking at the other side as a point to which a counterpoint to that weight, and bringing in those qualities. And it means then that if there are energies that we struggle with, and you know, we will hear people say, oh, I find that sign, I don't get on with people of that sign usually, or you know, we've all been there, and we all feel that at some point. Well, that means that there's something of that energy there that we need to learn from. There's there that's making us uncomfortable, and that's a signal. If something is making us uncomfortable, to ask, okay, what is it that's creating that discomfort? So this is where, you know, my hat as a clinical hypnotherapist comes in, you know, is because I'm used to asking that question, you know, what is it that's uncomfortable about it? Let's get to the bottom of that. But looking at it from an astrological perspective, then we're looking at the chart in terms of polarities. It's a very interesting exercise.
Yes. Yes, and it's something which, you know, if we're lucky, we can sort of build into our lives. So whenever we have a visceral response, and that can be, I mean, it's almost like when somebody treads on one of our complexes, if you like, you know. So the response, it's not just take it or leave it. It's a very powerful response, either towards or against something. It has actually has triggered something that we have in ourselves, which is probably unconscious. And so we can live like that. We can say, what is it about this person or this event which can teach me more about myself, you know, about my unconscious, about my complexes, about my neuroses or something like that, rather than to keep to take the path of righteousness.
There are times when righteousness is appropriate, but a lot of the time it's also not so much, and it's more productive to be looking inward. And I think really when we do that, we're stimulating the path of healing, but we're also doing something else from an astrological perspective. We are working then to do what I was thinking about, what I've been thinking about, is we're transmuting, we're doing something about that polarity where it's no longer a polarity. It's two sides transferring energy, complementing each other. And I think that's a very powerful and hopeful image when you know that you've got Pluto coming at you in a year's time, you know, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And of course, the other major theme that runs right throughout alchemy, as well as sort of the transmutation of these four elements, is the opposites, the king and the queen, the mystical marriage.
Of that, that's exactly what I was going to ask you to please talk about. It's the whole male-female relationship.
Yes, absolutely. And how they need each other, how they complement each other, and how they carry each other's shadows, and how it's so well understood. You know, wherever you read it, I think certainly Jung on the subject, and many of the alchemists, the king and the queen, the masculine and the feminine, the positive and the negative, are held in equal esteem throughout. And so it's really quite astonishing to think of that, because that's right through, you know, ancient alchemy and astrology, and right through medieval alchemy and astrology, the holding of the feminine as an equally valid viewpoint, that actually they need each other. So if the masculine spirit can't function without the feminine soul, and that they vice versa, you know, which is so evident in so many of the illustrations, the wonderful pictures, the alchemical paintings are, they speak reams just by themselves, and always hold the masculine and feminine in equal power, equal relationship, and both in the alchemical experiment are transformed through their encounter with each other. So it's a very, very inclusive and highly balanced philosophy, which is designed for us to find wholeness, completion in the mystical marriage of opposites.
We must stress here that this is nothing to do with sexuality. It's purely to do with energy, male and female energy being valued equally and at this moment in time, that also is extremely important, because one of them is always being devalued in one way or another, whether it's, men being told that they're all rapists and that they are the source of all evil in the world, or women being told that basically they need to suppress any thoughts of family, or so that they can be out into the world achieving and being valued members of society. Whichever it is, we haven't got it right. And so that idea brought about by those symbols is something that we're still trying to come to terms with. We're still trying to get our heads around how to do this.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right, which is what I was kind of referring to before. It's almost like, I mean, how far have we come, really? In, I suppose, really the recognition of the soul, because that's what it comes down to. It's like just validating and respecting and honoring each other as souls. And as you say, it's not about the physical. It's not about sexuality. Or even about gender. It's about the universal law of the yin and the yang. That energy, even if you go right back to Plato, and he's saying, the universe breathes in and out. It's that whole dynamism of opposites is what life is about, just breathing in and out. They're both necessary, and so yes, it's really important. And I suppose in a way that's the struggle that our species really is going through at the moment, is trying to rectify an imbalance, you could say, but not getting it right again and again. It would be helpful to be able to think more, I suppose, philosophically about it, rather than reducing everything to gender.
I loved also going back to the days in which I first was learning about astrology. The moon, very charismatic, everybody loves the moon. And whenever I hold any workshops on the moon, they're always, my most popular. Venus also, Mars less so. Everyone's so afraid of Saturn that they want to know about Saturn and all the others. And Mercury just kind of gets left in the shadows, and you get left to discover Mercury and his importance on your own. And of course, the interest in psychology, etc., and having ample Gemini in my chart and Virgo has meant that I paid attention to Mercury where others might not. And I found it fascinating to discover the role that he played in alchemy. Would you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think it's time that he got a little bit of glory, actually.
Yes, Hermes Mercurius is the agent, the active agent in the whole of this. He is the instigator of the he he brings about the changes. He facilitates the changes, the connections. He's throughout. He is the god of alchemy, and because in his very being he is he's hermaphrodite, so he's male and female. So he personifies, he embodies the not just the opposites, but also the potential for integration of the opposites. And without Mercurius, nothing would ever be able to happen. No experiments could take place, because he is the god of change, and embraces, straddles, really. And in all the pictures, all the alchemical pictures, you find Mercury, often in a very, very strong position. He's the 3 in 1 and the 1 in 3, you know. So he's crucial to an alchemical approach to astrology. But it's almost as though, you know, there are so many different levels for Mercury. Because in the chart, I mean, at the most base level, it's just, how does your mind work? How do you perceive things? And everyone perceives things in a very different way according to the position of Mercury on their charts. But overarching, and the entire chart is Mercurius, the connector. You know, he both separates the individual from the cosmos, but he also is the agent that joins the individual to the cosmos. And so in that constant separation and reconnecting, he is the way forward, I think, for an alchemical approach to astrology. Yeah.
I think that's what, it's funny because I guess I always knew that, but it was just there on the page, and it helped me consolidate. In fact, the whole book helped me consolidate a lot of thinking that I've been doing in the months prior to reading it. So there was a synchronicity in that, actually. But it made complete and utter sense to me, because we could talk about mind, body, and soul. And really, at a physical level, we could say, well, the brain kind of is the is the conductor for it all, because the chemical processes in the brain, you know, tell us whether to lift an arm, whether to speak, what to say. There's a lot of thinking going behind it, and now we're thinking, okay, so is there a difference between the mind and the brain? What is the difference? And then we throw soul into the mix, but somehow it all has to go through the brain and be processed through the brain and the body. And so it is that there is Mercury right there in front of us.
Yes.
And it's I guess I could say he's waving his magic wand, making it all happen, but actually no, he's carrying something rather important. He's carrying the caduceus. He's, you know, he's busy. He's busy is what he is, and that's us, busy. We are Mercury to a certain extent, or to a large extent, perhaps.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, the caduceus is the most wonderful symbol of the, you know, the staff, which has always been a symbol of power and leadership and rulership, but with the integration of the opposites as the serpents wind around it, and holding the central point without excluding either of the opposites, but actually acting as a central pillar. And it's a wonderful symbol, but also it's so light. It's so, on one level, so light, on another level, so profound. You know, as the gatekeeper, which Hermes Mercurius is. It's this. I love this idea of him having a foot in both worlds, and being the one that separates and reunites all the time. It's very, very, even if you think of the brain, you know, left brain, right brain, how do they work together? Do they work together? You know, can we Can we balance ourselves? Because most of us have a propensity to one side or the other, but they're both necessary.
Exactly. And just thinking about the caduceus and what you were saying about the connection between two worlds. I mean, he is the only god who can travel between both worlds, and here he is. He's got this staff, which, as you say, is about the integration, and that's healing. That essentially is healing. When you integrate, what are you doing? You're bringing everything into the whole, and you are healing. So there's something very important there as well.
Absolutely. And it's very much, it's the healing of the body mind. So it's not about separating the mind from the body. It's seeing that they are both essential parts of the system, and that in terms of that the body must not be forgotten, and that symptoms, for example, which we have, are messages. Messages that something is out of balance. And so it would be wonderful if we could learn, I suppose, as a species, to listen more to the symptoms, knowing that whether or not we understand them, they contain a huge amount of wisdom and information and knowledge, rather than, ignoring them or medicating them, for example.
And indeed, there is another aspect to it, which is that, as you say, it's the unifying of, the mind and the body and so on. But it goes even further, because for all the wonderful advances in Western medicine, we seriously are missing a trick. And it gets worse, because it's got worse and worse over the years, because of the tendency to specialize and to see everything as being separate. So if you have a problem with your liver, then it's a problem with your liver. It's not a problem with your, but nobody's told the liver that it's separate from the rest of the body, or that the rest of the body, that this is a liver problem that doesn't have anything else to do with the rest of the body. We are, the whole thing is an organism, and we have to understand that we can't just separate bits, and the best example I can think of in this is, I'm sure anyone who's injured one leg knows that they're at some point going to have problems with the other leg, because of overcompensation on the, shall we call it, the good leg. And so that's a really good example of how, if one part of the body is upset in some way, it's got repercussions for other parts of the body as well. So this is in all aspects of life. The notion of integration becomes important.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think I expect you're a fan of James Hillman, I should think, and I always loved his approach to psychology, and very much he was very much one that said we've got to bring the soul back into psychology, but what has happened in his view is that our diseases have become very personal. So they're to do with fixing our personal body, if we can. But he's saying that actually often they are symptoms of something which has gone wrong globally. Because that's something that that it's a worldview which, if you hang out with astrology for long enough, it becomes absolutely real to you that actually that the system is the universe, or at the very least the solar system, and that we're all living cells in the body of this integrated, unique organism, which is the whole, and that very often, if there's something wrong, with the individual, it's not the individual to blame. It's that they are picking up something that has gone globally wrong. So, for example, mass depression. or even mental illness could be, and he wrote this wonderful book, We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World is Getting Worse. That actually the time may be coming when we use the symptoms as messages about what's gone wrong in the world.
Yeah. and that put me in mind of morphic resonance.
Yes.
And so it goes on. So these very ancient principles of alchemy, which of course were also a part of astrology, as relevant as they have ever been. And here we are still needing to evolve and understand. And I hope that our conversation today on Lightways has done at least a little bit to illuminate in that direction. So Claire, thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure.
And what if anyone wanted to find you, how could they do that?
Right. Well, it's brought me to mind of a video. I don't know if you've seen the Instagram video that is about alchemy. It's very short. It's 10 minutes, and it tries to encapsulate, the essence of what's in the book. And you can find that on the Wessex Astrologer website, Margaret Cahill's website. So that's there on her blog, I think, this Instagram, and also you can just find me by Googling me, because I have got my website up there, just Clare Martin. What is it? Yes, claremartin.net.
Well, I will make sure that there is a link to your website and also to the Wessex Astrologer for two reasons: for your video, but also so that people can get hold of your book, Alchemy, the Soul of Astrology. Clare Martin, thank you once again for joining us today.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you for joining us and listening to Lightways. Next week, we're going to be back to evolutionary astrology with the wonderful Diva Green. And I just want to say thank you to all of you who take the time to write little comments for me, to send me little messages about things that you've enjoyed. So thank you all very much for doing that. It's lovely to know that you're enjoying Lightways so much. Until next week, goodbye.